You think you are breathing fresh air, but you're not. Not only are you not breathing fresh air, there are 9 million people who die each year because of the air pollution linked directly to burning coal, oil, and gas. That's 1/5 of total death each year globally, and more than die from smoking and malaria combined, for example. And that's just from the burning of the fossil fuels. I'm not even talking about what happens when you mine for them or you extract them. Coal mining, for example, is documented to cause severe health issues to the coal miners and the communities around them. And then on top of that, it destroys forests, it destroys ground cover, it buries streams, scarring the environment. And then once you burn the coal-fired power plants dump their waste product, which is called coal ash, mostly into nature, sometimes into regulated sites, but even then, that coal ash is a silent killer because toxic residues from that coal ash migrate into water supplies, which communities then drink. And I would just like you to keep in mind those 9 million deaths as context as you listen to this podcast episode. It's really tiring to see corporate evil, especially when it's the season to be jolly. But we need to talk about corporate evil. And that's companies knowingly doing harm, i.e. those without any possible excuse not to know what they're doing. And not only do we have to talk about it, we cannot let them get away with it. So we all know, or should by now, the trap set by fossil fuel companies, oil and gas in particular, over decades. They set a trap to convince individuals that they are responsible for the climate crisis through their individual choices. Imagine, to do that, British Petroleum pretty much invented the notion of a personal carbon footprint and carbon footprint calculators, and then backed it with more than $100 million of advertising each year between 2004 to 2006. That's a lot of money to put in our head that it's all our fault. And if only we acted in our individual choices, then everything's going to be fine. And they labeled their campaign, BP did, Beyond Petroleum. That's to subtly imply and plant in our head the fact that in order for BP to move beyond petroleum, we, individuals, cutting our carbon footprints, had to act. We also know from excellent Harvard University research in 2017 and 2021 that Exxon has been trying to systematically shift the blame for climate change to consumers. And to do that, they use tactics similar to those of the tobacco and the firearm industries. So that much we know as well. The Harvard researchers algorithmically analyzed hundreds of Exxon documents over almost 50 years, including those of its predecessor companies. The researchers then illuminated how Exxon manipulated public opinion through the use of super selective language and did that over decades, backing it by hundreds of millions of advertising dollars again. So, for example, out was fossil fuel combustion from Exxon's literature, and in was energy demand of consumers. It sounds better, doesn't it? Out too was climate change as a reality, and in was overusing, by Exxon, the word risk. And that was to make us feel that climate change was something way out in the future, which may or may not happen, instead of what it actually is, which is real and present danger today. And in, via Exxon, was helping customers scale back their emissions of carbon dioxide, and then asking the public to show a little voluntary can-do, while presenting themselves as inevitable with taglines such as, fossil fuels must be relied upon to meet society's immediate and near-term needs. And to top it all up, IN was presenting Exxon as a savior, stating as a fact that the increasing prosperity in the developing world will be the main driver of great energy demand, implying its products deliver prosperity. And therefore, Exxon, is just there to help poorer countries on their way to prosperity. But everywhere along the way, Exxon actually acknowledged its own culpability in internal memos that dated back all the way to 1982. So we know that, and this is super well documented. And BP and Exxon today are more sophisticated, and they use more subtle propaganda techniques, which I've documented many times in previous podcasts. But I was shocked to learn that a massive company, most people don't actually know anything about, recently took this to a completely other level. They combined the BP and Exxon fantasy world into a greenwashing push using children while simultaneously and boldly trying to fry the planet. Welcome to episode 56 of the Angry Clean Energy Guy. With me, Asad Razzouk. I am so happy you're here. Thank you. Gautam Adani was born in 1962 as one of 8 children in Gujarat. He was the son of a textile merchant. He dropped out of college to try a career in Mumbai's diamond industry in the early 1980s. But then he moved back home to Gujarat to import plastics for manufacturing. And that was the business that laid the foundation for his conglomerate, because today he's one of Asia's richest individuals and a multi-billionaire. Eventually, Gautam Adani started his own business, Adani Enterprises, to import and export commodities. So he did that in 1988. And he used profits from his business to back heavy loans to enter other industries. In 1995, he took control of what today is India's largest private port. And in 2018, he took control of 6 airports when they were privatized by the Indian government. So today, he's one of India's biggest private airport operators. He's also India's largest private ports operator. And he happens to be India's largest coal power producer, as well as controlling an increasing share of India's power transmission and gas distribution markets. And recently, he said his renewables arm, called Adani Green Energy, would invest $6 billion to build solar power plants with a capacity of 8 gigawatt, which when he announced it was one of the largest renewables projects in the world. So far, so good, right? Great rags to riches story, all the way to becoming one of Asia's richest individuals. But there's a couple of problems, and they are not small ones. Let's start with what the group is telling children. So the Adani Group launched a new campaign website called I Can. And if you check it out, it's just overtly aimed at children. It's got warm and fuzzy images of a green city with wind turbines, and it's written as if it was written by children and for children. And it's full of advice for kids. I'll give you some examples. Leveraging what BP and Exxon used to do, Adani Group urges kids to first know their carbon footprints and to calculate it. And then they suggest that they should eat less meat, less dairy products, they should choose organic foods, they should buy in bulk, they should cut waste. They then explain to them that fast fashion items are use and throw, and so kids should only buy sustainable or vintage or recycled clothes. And of course, they should wash them in cold water to deliver, according to Adani Group, an immense impact on their individual carbon footprints. Then, Adani suggests that kids should buy less and use recyclable grocery bags. And they want kids to switch to energy-efficient appliances, or at least tell their parents to do so, turn off the lights when they leave a room, and things like that. They also slide in that the kids can make innovations to make green installations, that the kids could innovate to make installing solar panels, for example, more affordable and available for all, because according to the website, that's the need of the hour. The irony here, by the way, is enormous because, of course, Adani Group knows that solar is about 50% of coal, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Because Adani Group also on that website want kids to remind their parents to carpool, to rideshare, to use public transport, and to walk instead of driving everywhere. They also pitch in to avoid air travel as much as feasible and work from home. And one of my other favorites is they want kids to plant trees, or rather innovate in new ways of collaborating to plant trees, again, because tree plantation is the need of the hour. And finally, the website has a section where kids can submit their own ideas about how to tackle climate change. And the implication from the website is, of course, unavoidable. Coal is affordable, cheap, available for all, healthy, safe, although the ICANN page never comes out and says that. But it's not that difficult to guess where this website is coming from, because Adani Group is embarking on the biggest, the boldest, the largest private sector coal expansion in the entire world. And to give you a sense of what they're doing, let's start in Australia. Adani's just started exporting coal from a very controversial project in Australia. And that's 2 weeks after the entire world agreed to phase down coal at the Glasgow climate talks. So while the world was meeting in Glasgow to phase down coal and put in multiple other measures to try and stop the climate from changing so fast and global heating from increasing above 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels, the Adani Group was finalizing its plans to export coal from Australia. And that's from the world's largest new coal mine. And even worse, that coal is supposed to go to India to feed coal-fired power plants, which would then export electricity to Bangladesh. So by the time they're finished with this, the Adani Group would have 20% of the world's population addicted to a coal infrastructure stretching from Australia to India to Bangladesh for decades. Now, that's the same group with the ICANN website giving kids advice on how they can cut their carbon footprint. An amazing Australian NGO called Market Forces has collated the whole shebang, everything Adani is doing in coal. So Adani paid $500 million for something called the Carmichael Coal Tenement in Queensland in Australia a little more than 10 years ago. And since then, it's had the overt goal of exporting coal for electricity to Asia. Now, exporting coal doesn't just happen when you dig for it. You have to dig for it, you have to build the railway system that then transports it, you have to then build a port or take over a port or expand a port to ship it, and you then have to unload it at the other end, etc. So the infrastructure involved is actually enormous, and we're talking billions of dollars. So the original plan was to have that coal mine pumping coal for export about 5 years ago. But the project became a touchstone for an environmental movement in Australia that has tried everything to stop this coal mine. And even as I speak, Adani still faces huge and daily opposition in Australia, from activists using nonviolent direct action to NGOs that are trying to push insurers, institutional investors, politicians, and other to stop this enormous coal endeavor, which, as I said, is the largest private sector coal expansion in the world, happening under our eyes, literally 2 to 3 weeks after the Glasgow climate talks. Now, why do I say that? Why do I say it's the largest private sector expansion of coal in the world? Because actually, the Australian coal mine is the thin edge of the wedge. Adani is blazing a trail for 6 other mines in Queensland, and these coal mines have enough coal to generate more carbon emissions than all of Australia, which is already a big polluter, generates now. And so Adani fought in courts for a decade to get this project over the line. And it had to self-fund it because no banks would touch it at the end. Banks tried to touch it, but activists effectively had them back off. Activists also went after insurance companies that backed it, and over 40 global insurance companies refused to as a result. But some, we don't know who because their names aren't disclosed, did back it in the end, and so the project was able to operate in December 2021. And the environmental destruction from this Adani mine is well documented, as is the assault on indigenous people in Australia, including the native title claims of the Wangan and the Jagalingu people to the mine site. So that's all very well documented. You can look it up yourself. But it's only the tip of the iceberg. Because what Adani is up to today is doubling its coal-fired power capacity by 12 gigawatts. That would get their coal-fired power to 24 gigawatts. And to put this in context, that's more coal power capacity than all of Australia today. So they want to double their coal-fired power capacity. They want to mine for more coal. They want to build new coal and LNG terminals in both Australia and India. They started an Australian rail company to move the coal from the coal mine to a port, which is now called the North Queensland Export Terminal, except there's a problem. That port is where else? In the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area. Of course. They're also building an obscure and super polluting facility to take coal and transform it into plastics, which is not what you usually do. Plastic is oil and gas, which is already terrible, but this is even worse because they want to make plastics out of coal. And this is a brand new plan. It's only in April 2021 that the Adani Group submitted an environmental clearance report to the Indian Ministry of Environment. And what they did is they proposed building a $4 billion coal-to-plastic plant in Gujarat. And guess what? They want to use imported coal to create all that plastic. But coal-to-plastic plants, as I said, are worse than oil-to-plastic because they're highly polluting and they produce about triple the emissions from oil to plastics. And that plastic plant alone that Adani want to build produces enough emissions to equal about half the emissions of all of Singapore. This just one plant in the middle of a climate emergency. And to top it all off, the Adani Group also want to build 1,500 new retail petrol stations and another 1,500 new compressed natural gas stations to feed the beast, so to speak. So that's why, all in all, this is the most ambitious private sector coal expansion anywhere to fry the world. And you need to admire what's going on here. There's a group intent on executing the largest single private sector coal expansion in the world, telling children to eat less meat. I mean, really? And that's not even the best part. How do we think the world is handling this? The answer is badly. If you start by looking at the ESG indices, for example, S&P Dow Jones only removed Adani from its ESG indices in April 2021. It waited, a decade to act. And so for a decade, investing in Adani was perfectly fine from an ESG perspective. Even worse, another ratings agency called MSCI, which actually is the biggest in the world, removed Adani Ports from 4 of its ESG-focused indices only in December 2021. So it's been sitting as an ESG stock all this time. And yet another ESG ratings agency called Sustainalytics hasn't yet bothered. It still has Adani as low risk from an ESG perspective. I mean, that alone tells you how much abuse is rife in the ESG space. And of course, the global context is completely opposite what's going on here. Because at the Glasgow climate talks, as I said, the world promised each other that it's phasing out coal. The International Energy Agency, which is traditionally an apologist for fossil fuels, made a huge pivot this year. And it said that getting to net zero emissions by 2050 means the world cannot afford any new oil, gas, or coal developments. None. And here we are developing and delivering a coal expansion which alone can fry the planet. But the disconnect runs deep. And I'll give you an example. The largest investor in the world, BlackRock, is backing Adani where it's invested to the tune of $1.2 billion. Now, that doesn't make sense at all. BlackRock cannot hide and say, oh, sorry, my funds are passively managed. There's nothing I can do about that. And because Adani is in some index, I have to have exposure to it. That's greenwashing. And BlackRock is not helping India either. India is actually a world leader in the energy transition. It's got strong government policies that are actually driving a credible decarbonization shift. And the shift in India is actually profound. In addition, already solar costs in India are 50% of imported coal-fired power generation. And corporate leaders in India, groups like Tata Power or Reliance Industries, have adopted net zero by 2035 policies. And that clearly suggests that the India decarbonization ambition is going to accelerate. And yet, the one group still massively backing coal makes appearances in ESG indices, make it look like it's all fine with what they're doing, and is backed by the largest institutional investor in the world. And this just needs to stop. BlackRock has to use the unprecedented power it has to accelerate the fight against climate change, not to slow it down. It's a $10 trillion giant. And when it moves, investors dragging their feet will also move. This, by the way, isn't going to last, and the coal nightmare will end soon, including in India. A lot of very good people are doing all they can. There are thousands of activists on the ground in Queensland, Australia, for example, fighting Adani with nonviolent action on a daily basis as I speak. And there are others who speak the language of financial markets who are also moving the needle. And I'll give you just one example. Ulf Erlandsen of the Anthropocene Fixed Income Institute, which is a new nonprofit set up in Sweden and the UK, is a bond climate activist. And what he does is he pushes institutions to stop backing groups like Adani that are expanding coal so boldly and so irresponsibly. So Ulf, for example, pushed Amundi, which is Europe's largest asset manager, into divesting bonds in a bank in India which was financing Adani. And he shamed other institutions into doing the same thing. Activists like all the Australians on the ground in Queensland and like Ulf will win. And I've saved the best for last. Last year, the Adani Group eviscerated the name Adani in Australia. Because if you can fool some people some of the time, then why not? So they rebranded the Adani Abbott Point Terminal and its holding company as the North Queensland Export Terminal. That's the port that they are exporting the coal from. Beautiful, isn't it? The North Queensland Export Terminal. And they rebranded their coal operations to Bravus, Bravus. And what's ironic about that is that they thought Bravus means brave in Latin. But guess what? It doesn't. According to an Oxford University Press article, it either means crooked, bad, or depraved, or it means barbaric, foreign, or uncouth. Take your pick. So that's what they called their group in Australia, which was previously the Adani Coal Australia Group. Now, I don't know if this rebranding is fooling anybody. I very much hope it isn't. On Adani.com, the chairman's message is, goodness is imperative for growth. Yes, indeed, Mr. Adani, it is. But only if deeds are consistent with the words accompanying them. And on that note, happy holidays to all of you, and may 2022 bring everyone health and happiness, both virus-free and Adani-free. I'll come back in January, and meanwhile, thank you so much for listening to this episode 56 of the Angry Clean Energy Guy, and have a great time.